I assume that you all follow current public debates regarding this heat event in the news or in social media. And as we can see, there are many different ways of addressing the same situation. Some headlines warn of a climate catastrophe, others focus on record-breaking temperatures. Some emphasize the lived experience of heat and its public health impacts, while others highlight practical suggestions for how individuals or how communities can mitigate its effects. At the same time, there are also more skeptical framings that question the extent to which extreme weather events are directly linked to climate change, or that emphasize natural variability and uncertainties in attribution science. Public reactions vary widely as well. Some respond with fatigue, many with concern, or even with climate anxiety, and still others with memes. On social media, scientific facts can quickly become interwoven with misinformation and conspiracy theories with a few clicks. In this context, many people are left asking themselves, what is actually happening? How worried should I be? And what am I supposed to be doing with this information? And that brings us directly to the question at the heart of the Media for Future project. We bring together journalists and climate scientists to explore how climate facts can be communicated in a way that is accurate, engaging, and useful. And ultimately, how do we tell the story of climate change so that people actually want to listen? And that is why we're especially delighted to welcome our speaker today, Carel Mohn. Carel Mohn is one of Germany's leading experts on science and climate communication. He is the co-founder and the executive director of Klimafakten, a platform that works at the intersection of science, journalism, and public engagement. Klimafakten, climate facts, I guess would be the translation, focuses on how to communicate complex climate issues in ways that are fact-based, understandable, and meaningful to different audiences. In other words, Carel spends a lot of time thinking about exactly the questions that bring us together today. Therefore, we are extremely pleased that he has agreed to share his expertise and insights with us.
Thanks for having me, Magdalena.
Our format's going to be simple. I will begin with a few questions, but of course, this conversation is not only about listening. So this is a shout out to everyone in the audience. We would love to hear from you as well. Please post your questions in the chat throughout the event, and our team will collect and bundle them so that we can include as many of the questions as possible in the discussion. But before we turn to the questions, I would actually like to ask you, Carel, to introduce Klimafakten probably, if that's okay.
Yes. Thanks again for inviting me. I'm looking forward to having this conversation. Let me just quickly open the window where I am about to share a few slides which give you an idea of what we're doing. Can you see the first slide? Yes, I can see you. So I guess you can see my slides. Yeah, a few words about Klimafakten. As Magdalena has said, we are a not-for-profit. We are based in Berlin. We've been around for the past 15 years. We actually started out as a pure fact-checking platform, dealing with wrongful claims and statements about the physical side of climate change. That's what we did in the beginning. And we developed into becoming the leading German language resource center for climate communication. Now, what is climate communication? The key question beyond fact-checking is how do you talk about climate change in a way that you actually positively, constructively engage people with the objective to have people support or even engage in climate action. So we started out as fact checkers, and then we quickly felt that we also need to deal with disinformation. What you can see on the left side is one of our most popular infographics called the Flick methodology. It explains the 5 key strategies that are typically employed in spreading disinformation, ranging from fake experts over impossible expectations to conspiracy theories. What we also do is we not only do fact checks and inform people about how disinformation works, we also train people. We do capacity building of solutions-oriented communication. And in that aspect, we've built a network of 20 trainers for climate communication that are located in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And if some of you are mostly working in the Anglosphere, you might know Climate Outreach or the Yale and George Mason Center on Climate Communication. These are similar outfits in the English language world. 2 more slides on us. This is an infographic based on social science research analyzing a new phenomenon in the field of disinformation called discourses of climate delay. It's where people no longer say there is no climate change, but where the focus is on dishing out disinformation regarding solutions. And these claims, these wrongful claims would, for example, be that it's not us who should act on climate change, but someone else. For example, India, China, industry, but not us. And what we're doing is we are translating this research into infographics like this, where we try to make it workable for audiences that need a more hands-on and practical approach. Yeah, maybe this is enough of an introduction.
Yes, thank you very much. And we've already had the first question asking if we can have the slides after the meeting. And if I understood correctly, Carol was very gracious and said we could use the slides as long as we don't publish them, as long as we don't then pass them on and publish them. So
yes,
thank you for that.
As you can see, I've built in QR codes which link to our website, and practically all of the material on our website is Creative Commons, so you can actually work with that. The only thing you need to do is to quote us.
Wonderful, very helpful. Thank you. You've actually already started, but let me maybe formulate one question a little more poignantly. You often emphasize that facts alone are not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is the case, what else is needed to truly reach people? How do we as journalists reach a broad audience?
Yes. You sent me a couple of questions in advance, and this question alone is such a huge question that I've prepared a couple of slides. First of all, to be very blunt, your question was, how can climate journalism reach broad audiences? My answer is, it has already reached huge audiences globally. This is a chart showing global data depicting the share of people in different countries who believe in climate change and think it's a serious threat to humanity. What is interesting about this chart is there is not a single nation in the world where we see that less than 60% of the population believe there is climate change, it's a real threat, and it's a serious threat. I find this heartening. So science and journalism and civil society have actually done a great job in getting this message across. So we don't really need to, or we shouldn't focus so much on the people who question the existence of climate change, because
Mm.
even in the US and in other countries where this is a potent political force, if you look at what the population, the broad mass of people see, this is not a relevant group of people. And I'm showing you another chart from data collected by the aforementioned Yale and George Mason Center for Climate Change Communication. And they're asking a number of key questions: whether climate change is real, whether people think that it's human caused, or us. And they're also asking about the scientific consensus. And you can see that in the US, all the figures are increasing, and you don't see the effect of the first term in office of the current guy in the White House. So I think this is a rather positive development that we can see here in these data.
That you already actually asked a question that was posted in the chat. So people do believe that climate change is caused by human beings. What I've noticed on the first chart is that some countries, the further north we get, in Scandinavia, there are less people that seem to believe that climate change is happening than countries further in the south. Does that uh, is that related to
Yes.
the fact that the impact is less felt? Because usually Scandinavia is an example for a very progressive region.
Yes, this is a picture that is showing in different surveys that populations in the global south tend to be more conscious of climate change. I guess there are several reasons for that. One reason is that people are less protected against the physical impacts of climate change, so they feel it in a very, very direct way. Secondly, I think there are cultural reasons. It's not a coincidence that the staunchest defense of the fossil fuel based business model you can see in the settler extractive economies of the West. Canada, the US, Australia, Great Britain. Incidentally, all these nations are also Protestant nations where the Calvinist stream of Protestantism is very strong. And also, there is a connection to the economic dominance of extractive industries. So in places where many people's livelihood depends on these industry, it's a readily available escape to deny the problem, because people are interested in defending their identity and their livelihood. And the easy way out is to simply question the existence of the problem.
And then my question would be, if you're saying, and that is actually something which makes me more hopeful than I was before I heard your answer, but if you say that more and more people are starting to believe that climate change is happening and that it's man-made or human-made, how that leads us to another question. How do we talk about climate change to people that are skeptical of climate policy, that are fundamentally maybe willing to engage in a conversation, but don't really believe it?
Yeah, there's multiple answers to that. We've actually published a 400-page book on your question, but I'll try to be a bit shorter. And if I had only one word or one sentence, I would say, Magdalena, you shouldn't talk so much to people, but the first thing to do is listen to people, right? because people have reasons to be skeptical either about the existence of climate change as such or skeptical of the solutions. The first thing to do, and I'll skip that here. Sorry, let me just, let's have a look at this image here. This is a traffic jam in Nairobi, Kenya. And what you can see here is a very strong reason for people to be skeptical about climate solutions. People may know that using public transport is a very useful and efficient way to cut emissions. Now, as you can see here, and this is the same in many other places in the world, there is no good public service when it comes to transportation. So people may be motivated to use public services. They may care a lot about climate change or protecting the environment, but then what they experience is they cannot reconcile what they would like to do and feel morally obliged to do with the infrastructure that is offered to them. And some people then become active and fight for better public transport. Other people, and we call this dealing with cognitive dissonance, are also looking for a way out of this uneasy feeling, this dissonance between what they would like to do and what they can actually do. And an easy way out is, again, to be skeptical of the solutions. So this is a simple explanation and one factor. And if we want to be a bit more theoretical, you can say that people may perceive climate action as a threat to their basic psychic needs. There are a couple of psychological models. This one is based on Maslow. There's also a German guy called Grave who built a similar model of key psychic needs, and you can see them in this pyramid. These 5 basic needs are self-actualization. This means that people want to have a positive image of themselves. The second need is esteem, which is essentially measured in the way we are respected and seen by others. There's the need for love and belonging that has a lot to do with your the groups you feel attached to, your identity as a social person. Then there is a safety need, which also is the need to control your environment. And then there are the very basic physiological needs. And if you go through this list of needs, you will find that climate change, but can actually be perceived as a threat to these needs. And also climate policy can be perceived as a threat. Let's just pick one example, identity. If you are a pilot and you have undergone a very intensive training that costs a lot of money and included hard learning, you actually don't want to hear that your work is destroying the planet. And because this leads you to very uncomfortable decisions to quit your job or to find a way of dealing with this very unwelcome truth.
I hear you. And this is maybe a little bit of an answer to Robert's question, who's worried about the people, not the climate deniers, but the people that have set different priorities, saying that the economy is more important or my well-being is more important. But let me get back to what you said at the beginning. Listen to people. If I'm a journalist, I'm trying to reach many people, and obviously I'm trying to formulate my message in such a way that it interests people, but I cannot listen to thousands of newspaper readers or followers on my whatever social media account, and I
Yeah,
still want to get to them in a way that is positive and won't upset them, but have them be open to my message.
you're absolutely right. Still, the question is how much time do we invest in talking to people or communicating to people, to audiences, and how much time in a day or in a week or in a year do we assign to listening and not talking? I think everyone needs to come up with his or her own response to that question, but I think it's a very important and useful question to ask oneself. Um, Maybe let's have a look at what social science tells us on that. And I want to go back to this chart here. As we've seen, looking at these global data, the first point is globally, people are worried about climate change. So you can also tell from the data that there is, across populations globally, there is a clear mandate for climate policy. People are not only worried, they're also expecting their governments and industry to do something on the issue. So audiences know about the problem. And what we also know from social research, what people are most interested in is solutions. The Yale Center recently asked people, if you had only one question you could ask a climate researcher, what would it be? Then most people decided to ask these researchers about solutions. Um, and then you need to look at the solutions. And what research also tells us that people are measuring these solutions against the 5 key so-called FSIP principles of social acceptance. And these 5 principles are symbolized by this pentagon. And these are the efficacy of climate policy measures. Secondly, the perceived fairness. Thirdly, and can you actually read it? Because this is, yes, the perceived simplicity of the measure, the question whether there is any individual benefit involved, and finally, whether there's a public benefit. And ideally, any given measure to fight climate change, to kill emissions, fulfills these 5 principles. And the point is, they should not only fulfill the principles, they should also be seen as doing that. And there you have another communication problem, because you have, for example, a number of highly efficient climate policy measures like emissions trading. This is hugely efficient, but people don't see it as efficient. They don't understand it. They think it's
So it's
unfair.
not simple.
And it's highly complex and very abstract, and economists understand it and love it, but not ordinary people. And then you have a problem.
Okay, so you actually need measures that are efficient, fair, simple, people perceive an individual benefit and a public benefit. That seems pretty much pretty complicated to um,
Yes, absolutely. I mean, climate policy is not something for amateurs. If it was an easy problem, we would have solved it long ago. Uh,
I guess you have
but
a point.
But then it's also not difficult to ask 5 questions to anything you want to undertake as a policy measure. And maybe you don't score 10 out of 10 points on every principle. But if you compare, and typically you have a range of alternative measures and approaches, you can regulate things by simply prohibiting certain activities. You can introduce taxation, you can give out subsidies. So there are a number of different approaches, and you can deduct a variety of individual measures from these broader approaches. And then you just check for any individual one whether they meet these 5 criteria, and one will score better than the other. And you need to do it twice. As I said, you need to ask whether it's built and integrated in the measure. And secondly, you need to look at whether it comes across and people perceive it in the way.
But now you're talking from the perspective of policymakers. I'm
Yes.
I want to hear from the perspective of a journalist.
Yeah,
What
I mean, journalists can ask exactly these 5 questions. And as we know, people really would like to see solutions. And I mean, we are in an absolutely absurd situation. We have so many fantastic solutions. They're all ready to be applied, right? I mean, renewable energy is the most obvious case in point. Electric mobility is another one. And you have massive dynamics on many of these instruments. At the same time, in many countries globally, we see a political backlash against climate policy. And these two developments really do not fit well together at all. And media and journalists should tell people there's a way out of this gridlock or political rollback, because we do have solutions. Some are better than the others. They all involve cost. They have side effects. And as smart adults, we need to analyze the costs, the benefits, the side effects, and then take decisions.
Mhm. Okay, that sounds convincing. That sounds doable as a journalist. But I still have a sort of cognitive dissonance in my head going on, because what I perceive is that what you're saying is very logical, and there's a certain amount of people who will agree, who are aware, but that there's a big audience that is either not aware, which you're saying is not the case, or does not want to listen to these solutions. So somewhere something is going wrong. And what is going wrong? What mistakes are journalists, what mistakes are we making when communicating about climate and climate change and solutions to climate change?
Yes, I've also brought a couple of slides on what you can do wrong. Let me share this again. Um, Here we go. This is about values, and we can come back to that because values are also a very important element in climate journalism and climate communication. But your question was about frequent mistakes done in media reporting. Um, One frequent mistake is to focus on individual action rather than the societal framework. I hope these photos show this clearly and illustrate this. If you tell people climate change is their problem because they're using a combustion engine car, people tend not to like that, right? Because the responsibility is dumped on that, and that doesn't feel fair to most people.
And
So
they have to give up a certain amount of comfort.
yes, right. Um, Maybe not necessarily, but at least in most cases, they have to change routines, habits, and even that is not something human beings like a lot normally. So, as an alternative, look at the broader picture. How is our infrastructure designed? In many cases, it's not our individual choice to use a car or to do other things that are not good for the climate. But we are more or less enhanced or forced to do this because this is the way society is organized. This is the incentives our tax system gives. This is the way our infrastructure is built. So working against all these external conditions feels like very strenuous and asking for a lot. So the emphasis should be really on the systemic framework conditions that either facilitate positive climate action or that induce us to harm the climate, even while we actually don't intend to do so. A second mistake is symbolized by these images focusing on the problem without showing agency and solutions.
Yes,
Now,
just scares.
um,
Yeah.
in the heat wave, in the current heat wave in Europe, we can look at how the media are covering this extreme weather. And I mean, there's a lot of reporting about the direct effects. That's, I think, okay. But we shouldn't stop there. We should talk about climate policy and how climate policy or adaptation policies can actually help us to solve the underlying fundamental problem. The final thing that I would like to highlight, this is a photo taken at one of the climate summits, one of the conferences of the parties, which takes place every year. This year in Turkey, I think. And this is a bit of a routine thing for many media. And the message that comes across every year is the world is going nowhere on climate change, because this is how the summit reporting tends to be. And maybe there isn't that much tangible or rapid progress to be seen at these summits, but this is not the entire picture. This is just a tiny bit of what's happening globally. And if you only link your coverage to these events, this is not showing the full complexity. And yeah, maybe one thing is here you see this is not climate action, but cooling action a couple of years ago. These protests where activists glued themselves to the street. Media like conflict. People do not like conflict, although they are interested in it and attracted by it. But if you focus your reporting attention only on these on the surface of these conflicts, I think you're also not doing a good job.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. You're an advocate for complexity, and that's something I like. I think we have to take more time to understand complex issues and not jump on supposedly easy solutions, which often turn out to be the opposite. But I'm still grappling with the algorithms, the people, or if you look at the exciting, at the violent events, you will have more followers, you will have more people reading what you're doing. How can you deal with that contradiction? Complexity and algorithms.
Yeah, algorithm-based platforms are a huge problem. I think they're doing a huge disservice to the public, the way they are constructed. I think the key approach to that is regulation. We should ask ourselves what benefits are these platforms giving to the public. and do we want to tolerate the damage they're doing?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in Germany yesterday, we have seen the publication of a set of recommendations by a commission that was asked to look at the effects of social media on children and adolescents. It's nice to have these recommendations, but there was no commission. We asked about the effects of social media when social media was dumped on us, right? We're all taken hostage by a huge global experiment. Do we want to accept that? I think we shouldn't tolerate that. Um, yeah, this is maybe not the response to how to deal with that on an individual base in your newsroom. um, so yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but that's what I'm saying as my first response.
Okay. Okay. Um, I see that there are a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to read one of them to you, Carol. One is saying what you've said is correct and would work in Europe and in North America, but what about the countries of the global south, where this issue is not being addressed at all or not receiving such close attention? What standards can be applied to this region, and is it possible to directly implement the Western agenda there? Knowing that, as an add-on from on my end, the global south is very, very big regions and countries differ a lot one from the other.
Yes, I must say I've mostly worked in Europe, so I'm not an expert on journalism in the global south. What I know from environmental psychology and social psychology is that human beings are, in how our brain is working and how our cognition is working are different in the north and in the global south. Um, so, if we have phenomena like, for example, pluralistic ignorance, I don't know whether you've heard about that. That's a very fascinating phenomenon. It's where people think that they are unique in their care about the environment. We tend to think that we care more about the environment or the climate or other key values than other people. And this is a cognitive bias. It's a systematic misperception of reality because it's not true that we or I, the two of us, Magdalena and Karel, we care more than the others because the others do care. And that's something we need to open our minds for this fact
Mm-hmm.
to stream in. And
Mm-hmm.
that makes a huge difference because it increases our motivation to act on climate change if we see that it is something that connects us with huge majorities. And the media who are telling the story that there is a societal backlash against climate policy, they're telling stories fabricated by politicians, but they're not telling the truth. Um, so to come back to your question, this is something that I think applies both in the North and the South and the East and the West. And it's helpful to know about that.
I agree with you. I spent many years living in Brazil, and for instance, I know that indigenous communities are the actors protecting the Amazon,
Absolutely.
and
Yes.
not us. I don't know, with money or with policy demands. But
And
there's a
also,
question.
as something that the maybe something that should be seen in the relationship between the North and the South, there is such fantastic action in the global South. Ethiopia has imposed a ban on combustion engine cars. The licensing of electric cars in Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia is skyrocketing.
How
Uh,
interesting.
the the shares of newly registered electric vehicles is much larger than in many Western European nations. And this is something the world needs to know. And this is something people in the South can be very proud of. And I guess it's not a well-known fact anywhere.
Yeah. Um, uh, there's Khaliev, I hope I'm not mispronouncing the name too badly, is asking in the post, what about post-Soviet countries? Um, or let me ask more concretely. I don't know Russia very well, but my impression is that in Russia, media and the free press have a hard time. So how do you deal with policies that make it hard to publish facts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that question goes beyond climate journalism.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
I think or my view on that is that what we see on Russia and what we see in Russian society and the development of the Russian regime is this is a system that is built on fossil fuels, and it's showcasing all the toxic effects that these extractive industries have. They typically lead to a concentration of power and the abuse of power. They are promoting corruption. They are hampering economic development and societal welfare. They're promoting violence and autocracy. I mean, most countries that are rich in oil and gas are not the best governed. Probably, the only country that is rich in oil and that doesn't have a problem in that regard is Norway. Um, but if you look around the world, most oil-rich or gas-rich nations aren't the best places to live in. And one thing we can do is to have a look at these connections.
Mhm. I see another question in the chat that somehow escaped me earlier. Sorry, I'm going to read it to you. Do you have any examples for good climate change summit coverage?
That's a really good question. I've only been to two climate summits myself. What I know is that these summits, I mean, actually, there are typically two summits. One is the actual negotiations. The second element of any climate COP is that they're functioning as huge fairs, trade fairs, or also fears of what's possible and happening politically. So these so-called side events are actually a lot more interesting than the negotiations, which the way they are constructed, actually need to end in gridlock because individual countries can block progress for dozens and or the vast majority of all the other nations. And we shouldn't only look at that side of what's happening at summits.
Any concrete examples of someone who's doing it well?
Not really. No, I have not looking at, different examples of summit coverage. Um, but I mean, if you have a newsroom that's covering the climate summit, that's fair. The same newsroom should look at climate policy, climate change, also during the rest of the year. Maybe that's the best answer I can give. Climate policy is a lot more than the COPs. And so much positive action is happening all around the year. So, yeah.
Hmm. And Robert is asking, by the way, anybody else, if you want to get your questions in, you should try to do so now as we're slowly reaching 5 o'clock. But Robert is asking, how about reporting the disadvantages people are suffering from too little climate action?
Absolutely. Yeah. Um, I mean, the answer is in the question. And this is something we are built to ignore. There are also psychological effects that play out here. One is very prominent. It's what is called loss aversion. Um, Typically, the way our brain functions, we tend to focus a lot more of what we stand to lose imminently. Um, and we are bad at assessing future losses or future gains. So, if you need to pay 10 cents more for your liter of gasoline, this is something that, strikes your cognition very directly and alerts you and stresses you. But people are very bad at relating this to a 10% likelihood of losing their house in 10 years' time. Now, this is a hugely fundamental risk, a 10% risk of losing your existence. Uh, but this is not something that our brain is wired to deal with in any meaningful way.
Oh, I understand immediately. You say that number, and my brain shuts down and says, "Not me, not in Berlin, not."
Exactly, and there are other biases that also assist in putting this to the side. For example, people have a tendency, if we hear about any risk, cancer or accidents, um, we tend to think this affects other people, right?
Yes,
I don't know the name of this bias, but it
self-protection
works,
bias.
I think. Yes.
No, I don't know. I just made that up. But let's talk about the opposite. There are fake news traveling the world.
Mhm.
How do I, as a consumer of news and of media, or how do I, as a journalist passing on information about climate change, make sure that I'm not passing on misinformation and producing disinformation? And how, how do I make sure I'm getting the facts right?
This actually isn't so difficult. First of all, I mean, there are many fact-checking platforms. We are one in working in German language, but there are dozens working in other languages. What is important about fighting disinformation is um, knowing the techniques that work, and one key approach is to explain to people how disinformation works. If people are trained to spot disinformation and are trained to understand the strategies and the techniques that make disinformation achieve uh, what it's meant to achieve in the brain, then they're better prepared to deal with that. Um, in the jargon, it's called inoculation, the inoculation approach, because it works a bit like a vaccine. where the immune system is trained with the virus. So it knows how the virus looks like, how it works, and it builds its immune response around this virus. And this is the same with disinformation. If you know, in what forms it could come and what techniques it employs, then your cognitive system, your alert system is in a better situation to deal with that. And that's a fundamental role of the media. And we have, this flick poster, which I showed in the beginning. That's our response to that. Actually, that's available in 12 different languages. I guess most people in this room, there's something on offer for us here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We will check on that again. Maybe to finish off the conversation, is there anything else that you would say without my having asked the question that you feel like is missing that you would like to share with us or?
Um, if there are no other questions, I mean, it's what we are stressing. There are 6 key messages that people need to know about climate change. They also showed partly in my slides. These are climate change. It's real. It's human caused. It's bad. Experts agree. And very importantly, people do care. They want to see action on it. And there are solutions. So these 6 sentences, I think, are a very valuable yardstick for any approach to dealing with the issue. And the nice thing is that telling people these facts makes a difference.
Mhm. Okay, I hope that all of us here now together can make a difference. And I actually am very convinced of the fact that it takes each and every one of us, and little steps do count as well, and that we should not be overwhelmed by the magnitude of the problem. Therefore, I want to thank you very much for this very practical approach for us. Um, Dear audience, listeners, if you have no more questions, I would ask you to take a minute to fill out a little survey that I am reposting here. And Carol, thank you so much for having taken the time, having engaged with us, having joined in this conversation, and especially for being so gracious and sharing your knowledge and sharing your tools with all of us.
With pleasure.
I hope to hear more of you and of all of you as well. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Same to you. Hope to see you soon. Bye bye.
Bye bye.